The courtroom was electric with anticipation as the tension reached its peak. Every eye in the room was locked on the two men at the center of the storm. Denzel Washington, calm and composed, sat at the defense table, his face a study in quiet resolve. Across from him, J.D. Vance, the sharp-tongued politician, leaned forward with an arrogant smirk, ready to make his move. He had a point to prove and was confident that his carefully crafted words would be enough to destroy Denzel's reputation in one swift blow. Thank you for watching this powerful moment of truth unfold. If you believe in standing up for what's right, don't forget to share this video and let's hold the powerful accountable together. Now, we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name and city name in the comments below. Let's see how far this message of truth can reach. The courtroom buzzed with excitement, the air thick with the weight of the moment. Cameras clicked, their flashes briefly illuminating the faces of the jury, the spectators, and the media team that had gathered to capture every single moment of this high-profile case. This was no ordinary trial. It was a battle of ideals. A battle for truth, and Denzel had more than just his name on the line. His entire career, his integrity, and his moral compass were being attacked. And he wasn't about to let that stand. J.D. Vance, ever the politician, stood tall and projected an air of invincibility. He knew how to manipulate the room, how to twist words, how to lead people to conclusions they weren't ready to make. His confidence dripped from every syllable, and he believed his political influence would crush the man sitting across from him, a Hollywood star with nothing more than a few performances to his name. But what Vance didn't know was that Denzel had been preparing for this moment, not with scripted speeches or rehearsed lines, but with the depth of his character, his unshakable calm, and his commitment to truth. The stakes couldn't have been higher. For Denzel, this wasn't just a courtroom battle. It was a fight for his life, his family, and the values he held dear. A man of principle, he knew that this was a defining moment. The world was watching, and Vance's words could either shatter his reputation or solidify his legacy. In that room, it wasn't about winning or losing, it was about doing what was right. Vance, sensing the power shift, began his attack. His words were sharp, laced with sarcasm and veiled insults. He tried to undermine Denzel's character using everything from his past roles in film to his philanthropic efforts, twisting them into something self-serving and hollow. With every accusation, Vance's confidence grew. He was certain that Denzel, the quiet and introspective figure, would crumble under the weight of his words. "You see, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Vance began, his voice dripping with disdain, "Denzel Washington, like so many others, believes that his celebrity status makes him untouchable. But I'm here to tell you that his reputation is a house of cards. One strong gust of truth, and it will all come tumbling down." The words hung in the air, heavy with malice, but Denzel didn't flinch. His eyes never left Vance's, unwavering and calm. He wasn't going to let this moment define him. Instead, he was going to take control of it. The audience shifted in their seats, unsure of what would come next. Would Denzel fight back with fire and fury? Would he play into Vance's hand? But then, without saying a word, Denzel stood up. His movements were deliberate, calculated. The room fell silent. Vance had just made his first mistake. He had underestimated the quiet strength of the man across from him. Denzel didn't need to raise his voice. His words, when they came, were measured and precise, each one calculated to expose the flaw in Vance's argument. He didn't lash out, didn't shout. Instead, he simply spoke the truth, and in doing so, he dismantled Vance's entire narrative. "You speak of reputation," Denzel began, his voice steady yet carrying a weight that sent ripples through the courtroom. "But you forget one thing. A reputation is built on truth, and truth isn't something you can fabricate to suit your needs. It stands on its own, no matter how much you try to twist it." The room held its breath as Denzel continued, his words cutting through Vance's polished facade like a knife. With each point Denzel made, the cracks in Vance's argument widened. The confident politician, once so sure of his victory, began to falter. His posture shifted, his smug smile faltering as Denzel exposed the contradictions in his statements. The jury, once captivated by Vance's rhetoric, now found themselves leaning toward Denzel, their faces softening in disbelief. The tension was palpable as the hero of this courtroom drama began to rise, not with anger, but with quiet strength. But that was just the beginning, Denzel continued, his voice never wavering. What happened next would change everything. Courtroom, once electric with the force of Vance's attacks, now seemed to hold its breath. The stakes had been raised, and Denzel had shown them what true power looked like, not in shouting or fighting, but in the unshakable confidence of knowing the truth and having the courage to expose it. And as the audience leaned forward, the one thing that was undeniable was that this battle was far from over. J.D. Vance leaned forward, self-satisfied smirk curling on his lips as he took the microphone, his eyes locking with Denzel Washington's across the courtroom. The air between them crackled with tension. The scene was set, the once unshakable politician now ready to break his opponent down with the weight of his words.
Yes.
His ego swelling with every passing moment. He had prepared for this. He had been waiting for the moment to strike his opening move, an attack that would make Denzel's defenses crumble. "Mr. Washington," Vance began, his voice smooth and dripping with sarcasm, "I'm sure the jury here today can appreciate your impressive career. I mean, who wouldn't be impressed by an actor who has made millions playing roles on screen? But let me ask you, what qualifications do you actually have to stand in front of us today and lecture us on the very issues at hand?
What makes you
Think you, a Hollywood star, should be taken seriously when the rest of us have spent years studying policy, making real decisions?" The words hung in the air like poison, each one designed to diminish Denzel's accomplishments, to paint him as an unqualified outsider. Vance's voice was a calculated mixture of condescension and subtle mockery, perfectly aimed at stripping away any credibility Denzel had in the eyes of the jury. The audience, unsure of how Denzel would react, sat at the edge of their seats. Would he retaliate? Would he be the fiery actor everyone expected, or would he fold under the weight of Vance's accusations? Vance continued, leaning further into his narrative, spinning the idea that Hollywood was a world of fantasy and fiction where truth was obscured by glamour and glitz. "You talk about justice, Mr. Washington, but can we truly trust a man who has spent his life pretending to be someone else, someone that's not real? I'm not sure the people in this courtroom, the ones who deal with the everyday struggles of America, can relate to your ... lifestyle." He paused, allowing his words to settle, as if waiting for the echo of his rhetoric to have its intended effect. He looked around the courtroom, surveying the faces of the jury, expecting to see doubt forming. "We need people who have lived the real world, who have faced real consequences. I just don't think that's you. You're a product of a system that's out of touch with reality, a puppet on a string hiding behind your screen." The jab landed, or at least that was the hope. Vance leaned back in his chair, waiting for Denzel to falter. He could practically feel the victory slipping closer. He had just shattered the persona of the man across from him. Surely now, Denzel would stumble, or worse, react emotionally. That was the advantage he'd been waiting for. The courtroom at that moment felt like a battlefield, with the audience caught in the crossfire. Denzel, however, did not budge. He sat in his chair, calm and composed, his fingers lightly tracing the surface of the desk. The energy in the room shifted as the silence stretched on, the tension palpable, hanging thick in the air. Vance could almost taste his victory, but something about Denzel's demeanor unsettled him. And then slowly, Denzel rose. There was no dramatic flair, no flash of anger or defiance. He simply stood, gathering his thoughts, his posture exuding a quiet confidence that no one in the room could ignore, with every step he took toward the microphone. Vance's grin faded slightly. He had expected a fiery response, but what he got instead was something far more dangerous, calm, calculated, and unshakable. Denzel began with a soft, measured tone. "Mr. Vance," he said, pausing as his eyes swept across the room, "let's address what you've just said, shall we?" The audience was on edge, every person in the room hanging on his every word. No one had expected the cool composure of Denzel Washington. This was not the angry actor who'd been caricatured for years. This was something far more powerful. "You question my qualifications," Denzel continued, his voice calm but piercing. "You ask what makes me worthy of being here today. I think the question is not what makes me qualified to speak on these issues, but what makes you qualified to speak for the people in this room. What makes you think your rhetoric-cure assumptions about me, about my work, have anything to do with the real issues at hand?" The room shifted, a subtle but noticeable ripple passing through the jury as they registered the shift in tone. Denzel wasn't flustered. He wasn't losing his composure. In fact, he was flipping Vance's attack into an invitation to engage. In a deeper, more meaningful conversation, Denzel's voice grew stronger. His words precise, every sentence carefully constructed to expose the flaws in Vance's argument. "Call me a product of a system out of touch with reality, but here's the thing, Mr. Vance. I didn't build my career by hiding behind fantasy. I built it by showing people the reality of the human experience through art, through stories, through truth. My work isn't just for show. It's meant to inspire change, to hold a mirror up to society and ask, what are we doing? Are we becoming?" He paused, letting his words sink in. The courtroom was silent. Even Vance, who had once been so confident, seemed to hesitate. The power dynamic was shifting, slowly but surely. "You see," Denzel continued, "what you misunderstand is that the truth doesn't care about the labels we put on it. It doesn't care about where we come from or what we've done before. Truth speaks for itself, and it stands, whether you're a Hollywood actor or a politician. And the truth is, Mr. Vance, you're trying to distract us from that truth, from the real issues we're here to discuss." Vance's eyes narrowed, his pride beginning to crack. He wasn't prepared for this kind of response. Denzel wasn't falling into the trap of emotional outrage or defensive posturing. He was laying out his argument with the kind of intellectual precision that Vance wasn't expecting from a man he had written off as a mere actor. The jury shifted uneasily in their seats, and there were small but growing signs of approval for Denzel's words. A few heads nodded, subtle gestures that suggested the room was beginning to warm to his side. The initial momentum of Vance's attack was starting to slip away. "Let me ask you this," Denzel added, his voice steady and deliberate. "Why is it that every time we face real issues, people like you want to make it about who's more qualified to speak? Why not focus on the issues themselves? Why not focus on what really matters to the people? Or is it just easier to tear someone down when you can't face the truth?" The silence that followed was deafening. The audience had heard it, the subtle yet powerful shift. Denzel wasn't just defending himself. He was calling Vance's entire narrative into question. Vance opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. The audience, once captivated by his confidence, was now silently turning their attention toward Denzel. The game had changed. The courtroom, filled with whispers and shifting glances, was no longer just a stage for political debate. It was a battlefield for the truth. Denzel had won the first round. The opponent, once so sure of his victory, now found himself on the defensive. The real battle had just begun. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as the final moments of this epic battle played out. Denzel Washington stood tall, his words having already left a powerful mark on the room. J.D. Vance, the once proud and arrogant opponent, stood there visibly shaken, his earlier confidence shattered beyond repair. He had no retort, no defense only. The faintest traces of doubt in his eyes. The weight of Denzel's words hung heavy in the air, and the once eloquent politician was now reduced to a shell of his former self. Vance tried to collect his thoughts, but the crack in his armor was wide enough for everyone to see. The audience, which had once been swayed by his rhetoric, now found themselves questioning his motives, his integrity, and most of all, his ability to lead with one final, hesitant step forward. Vance looked around the courtroom, his gaze flicking nervously from the jury to the spectators. He opened his mouth, perhaps to salvage some dignity, but the words never came. The silence from him only seemed to further expose his defeat. It was as if the reality of the situation finally hit him. His manipulation, his arrogance, his overconfident attacks had all crumbled in the face of truth. And just like that, Vance was done. His previous bravado, once a weapon to control the room, had evaporated into nothingness. The audience, once unsure of who to support, had seen the truth laid bare. Denzel, with grace and dignity, had exposed the flaws in Vance's argument and, more importantly, in his character. There was no more room for the manipulative political games that had defined so much of Vance's career. The courtroom, once charged with tension, now held only the quiet buzz of people digesting what had just unfolded before their eyes. Vance's pride, his last shred of composure, evaporated as he turned and exited the room with his tail between his legs. He didn't need to say anything more. He was done. The man who had walked in so full of certainty had left without a word, his reputation hanging by a thread. Denzel watched him leave with a steady gaze, his expression not one of triumph, but of quiet reflection. He knew this moment was bigger than just the courtroom. It was a win not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated, for everyone who had ever been silenced by arrogance and manipulation. As the room settled into the aftermath of the dramatic confrontation, Denzel turned to face the jury and the audience, his voice now a steady, commanding force that filled the courtroom with an undeniable truth. "In the end," he said, his words resonating deep within the hearts of everyone listening, "intelligence, merit, and truth always rise above arrogance and manipulation." The weight of his message hung in the air, each word carrying the force of someone who had fought for what was right, not just for himself, but for those who would follow in his footsteps. Denzel didn't need to shout. He didn't need to be flashy. He simply spoke the truth, and in doing so, he reminded everyone in the room and those watching at home that the real strength lies in honesty, integrity, and the courage to stand firm in the face of adversity. "Let this be a reminder," Denzel continued, his gaze sweeping across the courtroom, "that no matter how loud the voices of manipulation or arrogance get, the truth will always be louder. It may take time, but in the end, the truth always wins. It always rises." As the jury nodded in agreement, some even wiping their eyes, the weight of Denzel's words began to sink in. This wasn't just a courtroom victory, it was a victory for truth, for integrity, and for the silent warriors who fight every day to ensure justice is served. The camera panned across the room, capturing the subtle shift in the crowd. Those who had once been unsure, perhaps even swayed by Vance's words, now found themselves nodding along with Denzel. The hero had triumphed not with force, but with a quiet, unshakable truth. But this wasn't just about Denzel, and he knew it. This was about a larger battle. A battle against the manipulation of truth for personal gain. A battle against the voices that sought to silence the real struggles of everyday people. This was a message to every person who had ever been told they weren't good enough, that they didn't belong, or that their voices didn't matter. "This is your victory too," Denzel said softly, his voice carrying through the stillness of the room. "Because in this world, no one's voice should be silenced by the lies of others. We all have a part to play in making sure truth is heard." The audience, now deeply moved, knew that Denzel's words weren't just for this moment, they were for every moment. For every battle that had been fought in the name of truth and justice. And with that, the final lesson was clear. Truth, when backed by intelligence and integrity, is an unstoppable force. As the courtroom slowly emptied, the weight of the battle still lingered in the air. This was the kind of moment that changed everything. Denzel's message had been clear, and the world would not forget it. But this wasn't just the end, it was a call to action. "Do you think justice was served?" Denzel asked, turning one last time to the camera. "Let us know in the comments." The screen flashed to black, but not before Denzel's final, powerful words echoed one last time. "If you believe in standing up for truth, share this video and let's hold the powerful accountable." And just like that, Denzel Washington's stand for truth was more than a courtroom win. It was a movement, a call for everyone to rise above the noise and fight for what is right, no matter the cost.